Nero Wolfe and the Murderer's Pumpkin. It was a Friday evening in late October when the autumn chill finally convinced New York that summer was truly dead. The brownstone on West 35th Street stood solid against the wind, its bulletproof windows reflecting the jack-o'-lanterns that were beginning to appear on neighboring stoops like orange sentinels. Inside, the 5 Dobermans that had become as much a part of the household as Fritz's cooking were distributed throughout the first floor with military precision. Caesar, the eldest and most commanding of the pack, lay near the door to Wolfe's office. Mars prowled the hallway with restless energy. Apollo had claimed his station near the front windows, his ears perpetually alert. Minerva rested at the foot of the stairs, her intelligent eyes tracking every movement, and Diana, sleek and intuitive, had positioned herself near the kitchen, where Fritz Brenner was preparing something that smelled magnificent and involved considerable amounts of butter. I was at my desk in the office, catching up on correspondence and trying not to think about the Halloween party I'd been invited to by a redhead named Lily Corbett. Nero Wolfe sat behind his desk, a seventh of the way through his current book, a glass of beer at his elbow catching the lamplight like liquid amber. The doorbell rang at 8:17. Caesar's head lifted immediately, a low rumble building in his chest. I glanced at Wolfe, who didn't move. The bell rang again, more insistently. "Archie," he said without looking up. "I'm going," I said, rising. Through the bulletproof one-way glass panel beside the door, I could see the stoop was empty. No person stood there, but something else did. A pumpkin. Not just any pumpkin. This was a monster, easily 3 feet in diameter, sitting squarely in the center of the stoop. It had been carved with extraordinary skill, a face that was somehow both grinning and screaming, with eyes that seemed to follow you. In the October darkness lit by the street lamp, it looked less like decoration and more like a warning. "We have a delivery," I called back to Wolfe. "At this hour, is it orchid supplies?" Not unless Theodore's started ordering from a farm in Sleepy Hollow. I heard the creak of his chair, a sound that always meant annoyance, and then his bulk appeared in the doorway. Caesar rose and moved to his side. Wolfe looked through the panel, his eyes narrowing. "A pumpkin," he said flatly. "A very large pumpkin," I agreed. "Should I bring it in?" "No. Leave it there. It might be from a client or an admirer. You do have those, allegedly." His glare could have curdled milk. "Archie, I do not celebrate Halloween. I do not appreciate pranks, and I most certainly do not wish to participate in whatever juvenile tradition involves leaving oversized gourds on doorsteps. Let the sanitation department handle it Monday." But even as he spoke, I saw something that made me reconsider. There was a card attached to the pumpkin stem, and in the glow of the streetlight, I could make out handwriting. Elegant handwriting, the kind that came from private schools and old money. "There's a note," I said, and opened the door. The October air rushed in, carrying the smell of burning leaves and something else, something chemical and cold. Caesar and Mars both moved forward, flanking me as I stepped out. I grabbed the card and retreated quickly, shutting the door behind me. The envelope was heavy cream stock, unsealed. Inside, on matching paper, was a single sentence written in fountain pen. "For the great detective who fears nothing, a gift wrapped in autumn's finest disguise." I handed it to Wolfe. He read it, his expression unchanging, then placed it precisely in the center of his desk blotter. "Bring it in," he said quietly. "I thought you didn't want—" "Now, Archie." When Nero Wolfe used that tone, you moved. I went back out, the 2 Dobermans at my heels, and hefted the pumpkin. It was heavier than I expected, at least 40 pounds. As I carried it across the threshold, I noticed that its weight was distributed oddly, as if something solid sat inside it. Mars growled, low and continuous. Diana had appeared from the kitchen and stood rigid, her whole body vibrating with tension. "In here," Wolfe directed, gesturing to the office floor. "Carefully." I set it down on the Persian rug, and that's when I smelled it distinctly. Dry ice. The chemical cold I'd noticed outside was coming from inside the pumpkin. "Fritz," Wolfe called. Fritz appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, took one look at the scene, and stopped. "Mein Gott. A knife, please. And gloves. And perhaps you should telephone Saul." Fritz didn't question it. He returned in 90 seconds with a kitchen knife, rubber gloves, and the news that Saul Panzer was out of town until Monday. Wolfe nodded, pulled on the gloves with distaste, and approached the pumpkin. "This is theatrical," he muttered, "and therefore contemptible." He inserted the knife into the top of the pumpkin and began cutting around the stem with surprising delicacy for a man his size. The carved face seemed to watch us as he worked. When the top came free, a billow of white vapor poured out, dry ice fog, spilling across the floor like something from a cheap horror picture. The dogs backed up as one, still tense but not retreating. Wolfe reached inside and withdrew a metal container, the kind used for shipping biological samples. Frost covered its surface. He set it on his desk and opened it. Inside, packed in more dry ice, was a human hand. It had been severed cleanly at the wrist, recently enough that the flesh still looked almost alive. The fingers were arranged in a peculiar way, curled slightly, as if still holding something. But what caught my eye was the cufflink, an antique piece, clearly expensive, silver with an engraved design of a serpent eating its own tail. The serpent's scales were picked out in what looked like small emeralds. "Well," I said, "that's certainly more interesting than candy corn." Wolfe stared at the hand for a long moment, then lifted his eyes to meet mine. "Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have received a piece of evidence in a murder case, a murder that I suspect has not yet been officially reported." "How do you know it's murder?" "Because," Wolfe said, gesturing at the pumpkin, the note, the theatrical arrangement, "whoever delivered this took considerable care to ensure we would find it, examine it, and become involved. This is not disposal, this is invitation, or challenge." He lowered himself back into his chair, which groaned in protest, and reached for his beer. And I find myself extraordinarily disinclined to accept either. Inspector Kramer arrived at 9:30 with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins and a crime scene photographer. I'd warned him over the phone about the Dobermans, so he came prepared with nerves of steel and a bag of liver treats that Fritz had suggested. Mars still growled at him, but Caesar, ever the diplomat, accepted a treat and settled down. Kramer stood in the office, his unlit cigar working from one corner of his mouth to the other, staring at the hand in its container on Wolfe's desk. "Halloween," he finally said. "I hate Halloween." "I share your sentiment," Wolfe replied. "You got any idea whose hand this is?" "None whatsoever." "Any idea why someone would leave it on your doorstep?" "Several theories, none worth voicing yet." Kramer's jaw tightened. "You're going to be difficult about this." "I'm going to be accurate about this, which you frequently mistake for difficulty." Wolfe gestured at the hand. "Note the manicure, professional, recent. The skin suggests someone who didn't perform manual labor. The ring finger shows an indentation where a wedding band was worn for years and recently removed. The cufflink is exceptional craftsmanship, likely European, late 19th century. The serpent motif, Ouroboros, suggests either classical education or pretentious affectation." "Or both," I offered. Kramer pulled out his notebook. "The hand was delivered when?" 8:17, I said. "I can be precise because I was watching the clock, hoping for an excuse to leave early." "Why?" "I have a social engagement." "With the redhead?" Kramer asked, surprising me. "You know about Lily?" "I know you've been seen with her at the Flamingo Club 3 times in the past 2 weeks." "I know things, Goodwin. It's my job." He turned back to Wolfe. "Did you see who delivered this?" "No." "Did anyone?" "Fritz was in the kitchen. I was in this office. Archie was at his desk. None of us saw the delivery." "Security cameras?" "I don't have security cameras, Inspector. I have 5 extremely alert dogs and bulletproof windows. The former are more reliable and less invasive." Kramer looked at the Dobermans, who were all watching him with varying degrees of suspicion. "They didn't bark." Caesar alerted when the doorbell rang, but whoever made the delivery was already gone. "So someone sneaks up to your door, drops off a pumpkin with a human hand inside, rings the bell, and vanishes into the night. On Halloween weekend, in Manhattan." Kramer's cigar rotated. "This is going to be a nightmare." The photographer finished his work, and Stebbins carefully bagged the hand and the cufflink separately, each in its own evidence container. The pumpkin, the note, and the container went with them. As they were leaving, Kramer paused at the door. "Wolfe, if you know something, I know nothing of value to you at present. But you're thinking about it." "I think about many things. Most of them are none of your concern." Kramer left with a grunt that suggested he knew exactly what Wolfe was doing and disapproved entirely. After they'd gone, Wolfe sat in silence for several minutes. I waited. Fritz appeared with a fresh bottle of beer, poured it with perfect precision, and departed. The dogs resettled in their positions. The brownstone returned to its usual evening quiet. "We're not taking this case," I finally said, "because technically there is no case. No client, no fee, no reason to get involved." "Correct. And you're annoyed because someone used your doorstep as part of their murder theater." "That is also correct. So we'll let Kramer handle it." Wolfe said nothing, which was always dangerous. At 10:15, the doorbell rang again. This time, Apollo's sharp bark accompanied it. Through the panel I saw a messenger, teenage kid in a bicycle courier's outfit, holding an envelope. I opened the door with Mars at my side. The kid took one look at the Doberman and nearly dropped the envelope. "Delivery for Nero Wolfe," he squeaked. "I'll take it." "I need a signature." I signed, tipped him, and closed the door. The envelope was the same cream-colored stock as before, same elegant handwriting, but this time there was more than one sentence. I brought it to Wolfe, who opened it and read aloud. "Dear Mr. Wolfe, I apologize for the crude nature of my earlier message. I understand that a man of your refined sensibilities might find such theatricality distasteful. However, I required a method of securing your attention that would prove impossible to ignore. By now, Inspector Kramer has taken possession of the evidence I provided. He will not solve this case. He lacks the necessary intellectual capacity and imagination. You, however, possess both in abundance, or so your reputation suggests. I wonder if that reputation is deserved, or if you have simply grown comfortable in your protected little world, surrounded by your orchids and your dogs and your bulletproof glass. How long has it been since you truly tested yourself against a worthy opponent? The hand belongs to a man named Jasper Blackwood Thorne. You'll find that he was reported missing this morning by his business partner. He was alive when I last saw him 3 days ago. He is not alive now. The cufflink is a clue, one of several I've scattered like seeds throughout this city. Each one will lead you closer to me. If you choose to accept this challenge, I suspect you won't. I suspect you'll sit in your comfortable chair, drink your imported beer, and let the police fumble their way toward failure while you congratulate yourself on remaining uninvolved. Prove me wrong, Mr. Wolfe, or prove that your genius is nothing more than convenient myth. With respect and curiosity, a student of your methods." Wolfe set the letter down very carefully. His face had gone completely expressionless, the way it did when he was truly furious. "Archie," he said softly, "call Saul, Fred, and Ori. I want them here Monday morning at 11, regardless of prior engagements. Call Lon Cohen at the Gazette and ask him everything he knows about Jasper Blackwood Thorne. Then call Lily Corbett and inform her you won't be attending her party. Because we're taking the case." "Because," Wolfe said, his voice sharp as shattered ice, "someone has made the profound mistake of confusing my preference for privacy with incapacity. That error will be corrected." He picked up his current book, found his place, and continued reading as if the conversation had never happened. I grinned. When someone got under Wolfe's skin enough to make him accept a case out of pure spite, the result was always spectacular. This was going to be interesting. Lon Cohen called me back at 11 that night. I'd given up on making Lily's party and was in the kitchen with Fritz, drinking coffee and watching him prepare something complicated involving duck. The Dobermans had finally relaxed, spreading out through the brownstone in their usual nighttime positions. "Jasper Blackwood Thorne," Lon said without preamble. "How much do you want to know?" "Everything that won't get you fired." "That's most of it. Thorne's a jewelry magnate, Thorne and Ashcroft, the place on Fifth Avenue where people go when they want to spend obscene amounts of money on rocks. He's 53, married once, divorced 5 years ago, no children, worth somewhere between 20 and 40 million, depending on who's counting." I whistled. "That's a lot of cufflinks." "Funny you should mention that. Thorne was known for his collection of antique jewelry, had pieces dating back to the Renaissance. The stuff in his private vault supposedly makes most museum collections look pedestrian. Reported missing this morning by his business partner, Gerald Ashcroft. Thorne didn't show up for an important meeting with a client, an Arab prince who wanted to commission a necklace for his latest wife. Missing a meeting like that is apparently equivalent to setting money on fire. Ashcroft got worried, went to Thorne's apartment, found no one home, and called the police. What'd the police find? Nothing useful. No signs of struggle, no blood, no body. Thorne's been known to disappear for days at a time. He's got a hunting lodge in the Adirondacks, so officially, it's just a missing persons case. But, word is, Kramer got very interested in it, very suddenly, about 2 hours ago, right around the time he would have been leaving your place. I smiled. Lon Cohen was the best reporter at the Gazette, precisely because he knew exactly what questions to ask and when to shut up. Anything else about Thorne? Plenty. He's a fixture in society pages, attends the right parties, donates to the right causes, sits on museum boards. But there's an edge to him. Rumors of affairs with married women, aggressive business practices, lawsuits that get settled quietly. Not a beloved figure, but a respected one. Enemies. Undoubtedly. But the kind who'd sue him or cut him at parties, not the kind who'd cut off his hand and stuff it in a pumpkin. Don't be too sure about that. The wealthy get creative when they're angry. Good point. Want me to dig deeper? Yes, but carefully. If someone's playing games with us, I don't want you caught in the crossfire. Touching concern. Archie. I'll remember it when you need another favor. After Lon hung up, I went back to Wolfe's office. He was still reading, but I knew he was waiting for my report. I gave it to him concisely. When I finished, he closed his book. Gerald Ashcroft, he said, the business partner who reported Thorne missing. I want to see him, Monday morning before Saul and the others arrive. You think he's involved? I think a man's business partner is always the first person to consider when that man vanishes. Partnerships are built on trust and money, and both are remarkably fragile foundations. Want me to call him tonight? No, morning is sufficient, but I want you to do something else tonight. I waited. The letter writer mentioned scattering clues throughout the city. That suggests someone with intimate knowledge of Thorne's life and habits, someone who knew where to find meaningful items connected to him. His apartment would be watched by now. But Manhattan is a large city with many establishments that cater to the wealthy. Thorne was known for his social activities. Where would he have spent his evenings? I thought about it. The usual places, the club, probably. That's where his type likes to conduct business after hours. Maybe the Velvet Room, if he liked jazz. The Constellation Room, if he liked to be seen with actresses. Start with the club. Take Mars with you. Ask about Thorne, about his habits, about anyone who might have been particularly interested in him recently. Be observant. It's after 11 on a Friday night. The club will be winding down. All the better. Staff will be tired, and tired people are honest people. I looked at Mars, who lifted his head from where he'd been dozing near the desk. His eyes gleamed with interest. Come on, handsome, I said. Let's go see how the other half lives. The October night had turned colder, the wind cutting through even my jacket as Mars and I walked toward Fifth Avenue. The Halloween decorations looked more sinister now, the paper bats and cardboard skeletons acquiring an edge in the darkness. Someone had scattered autumn leaves across the sidewalk, and they rustled like whispers as we passed. The club was an institution that predated the Civil War, housed in a building that looked like it had been transplanted from an English countryside, all dark wood, brass fixtures, and the kind of subtle wealth that never needed to announce itself. The doorman, a granite-faced man named Peterson, recognized me from previous cases. Mr. Goodwin, he said, then looked at Mars. And friend, he's house-trained and better behaved than most of your members. I need to ask a few questions. About Jasper Thorne. Peterson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Mr. Thorne hasn't been here in several days, but he was a regular? A member for 23 years. Who'd he usually meet with? I'm not in the habit of discussing members' private affairs. I pulled out a $50 bill. Mars sat at perfect attention, looking like he'd been carved from obsidian. Peterson glanced at both of us, sighed, and pocketed the bill. Mr. Thorne typically dined alone or with business associates. Recently, however, he'd been meeting with a woman. Description? Late 30s, auburn hair, expensive taste in clothing. She'd arrive separately, they'd have drinks in the library, and she'd leave first, very careful about appearances. Name? She signed in as Mrs. Rowena Fellows. Married? The misses could be courtesy or accuracy. I don't make assumptions. How recently did they meet? Last time was Wednesday evening. They argued. Publicly? Quietly, but visibly. He left first, which was unusual. She remained another 20 minutes, making phone calls. You heard any of it? I'm a doorman, Mr. Goodwin, not a spy. But he shifted weight, and I knew there was more. I pulled out another 20, for Mars's treat fund. Peterson almost smiled. I heard her say something about keeping secrets, and too dangerous. Mr. Thorne replied that some secrets were worth the risk. Then he walked out. She come back after that? Not that I've seen. I thanked him, slipped him my card. If you remember anything else, and headed back to the brownstone with Mars. The Doberman stayed close, alert, his head turning at every sound. Halfway down 35th Street, he stopped abruptly, a growl building in his chest. What is it, boy? He was staring at a car parked across from the brownstone. Dark sedan, engine running, no one visible inside. As we approached, it pulled away smoothly. No rush, no panic. Professional. Someone's watching the house, I said to Mars. Question is, are they watching to see what we do, or waiting for an opportunity to do something themselves? Mars didn't answer, but he stayed tense all the way to the front door. Inside, I gave Wolfe my report. He listened without interruption, then nodded once. Rowena Fellows, find her. She may be a victim, a suspect, or merely a witness, but she knew Thorne recently, and she'll have information. And the car watching the house. Expected. We've been challenged, Archie. The challenger wants to know if we've accepted. Now they know we have. He picked up his book again, but I noticed his hand move to press the button beneath his desk, the one that activated additional security measures throughout the brownstone. We had bulletproof windows and mirrors, yes, but we also had pressure sensors, camera systems Wolfe pretended not to have, and locks that would make a bank vault jealous. The dogs would sleep light tonight. So would I. Saturday morning arrived with fog thick enough to slice and serve on toast. I spent breakfast plotting my approach to finding Rowena Fellows, while Fritz served eggs that deserved poetry, and the Dobermans performed their usual rotation through the kitchen, hoping for scraps. Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at 9, spent his customary hour with the orchids' needs, then settled into his office chair with the morning papers. Gerald Ashcroft will be here at 11, I informed him. I called his service and left a message that sounded urgent but vague. He called back at 8, sounding nervous. Good. Also, I've got a lead on Rowena Fellows. Lily's cousin works at a gallery in Soho. If Fellows has money and taste, someone in that circle will know her. After Ashcroft leaves, and take Diana with you, she's good with women. I looked at Diana, who tilted her head as if considering the assignment. Sexist, but probably accurate. At precisely 11, the doorbell rang. Apollo barked once, his stranger alert, and I checked the panel. Gerald Ashcroft stood on the stoop, looking like he hadn't slept. He was perhaps 60, silver-haired, expensive suit rumpled, eyes red-rimmed behind wireframe glasses, the kind of man who'd built his life on order and was now confronting chaos. I let him in. Caesar approached slowly, assessed him with one long look, and returned to his position by Wolfe's desk. Apparently, Ashcroft passed inspection. Mr. Wolfe, Ashcroft said as he entered the office, your man said it was urgent. Do you have news about Jasper? Sit down, Mr. Ashcroft. Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair. Would you like coffee? I'd like to know why you called me here. The two are not mutually exclusive. Archie, coffee for Mr. Ashcroft. And for me, beer. Fritz appeared as if summoned by telepathy, which, knowing Fritz, was entirely possible, and delivered both within minutes. Ashcroft clutched his coffee cup like a life preserver. Now, Wolfe said, settling his bulk more comfortably, when did you last see Jasper Thorne alive? Wednesday evening. We had dinner at Delmonico's to discuss the Rashid Commission. Jasper was in excellent spirits. And Thursday. He didn't come to the office. That wasn't unusual. He often worked from home when designing pieces. But Friday morning, when Prince Rashid arrived for his appointment and Jasper wasn't there, I became concerned. You went to his apartment? Yes. The doorman let me up. Everything looked normal. Jasper's design materials were out. sketches for the prince's necklace, but no Jasper.
Did you call the police immediately?
I called Jasper's phone first. No answer. Then I called his lodge in the Adirondacks. The caretaker hadn't seen him. Finally, I called the police. Wolfe drank some beer. "Mr. Ashcroft, I'm going to ask you a question that you'll find offensive. Please answer it anyway. Did you kill your partner?" Ashcroft's cup rattled against its saucer. "My God, no. Jasper and I have been partners for 30 years. He's not just my business associate, he's my friend. Friendship is not incompatible with murder. Often, it's a prerequisite. I didn't kill him. Yet you're here, in my office, after receiving a vague and urgent summons from a private detective. Why?" Ashcroft set down his coffee with shaking hands. "Because Inspector Kramer came to see me this morning. He asked me. He showed me a photograph. He wouldn't tell me where he got it, but he asked if I could identify what he called a piece of evidence. It was Jasper's hand, his right hand, still wearing the Ouroboros cufflink I gave him for his 50th birthday." His voice cracked on the last word. Wolfe waited through the silence. I'd seen him do this before. Let grief or fear or guilt fill the empty space until it spilled over with truth. "Inspector Kramer asked if I knew anyone who might want to harm Jasper," Ashcroft continued. "I said no, but that was a lie. A lie you'd like to correct now. I don't know if this is relevant, but Jasper had become secretive in recent months. Private meetings, phone calls he wouldn't explain. I asked him about it once, and he said he was working on something important, something that could change the nature of our business entirely. Did he elaborate? No, but he'd been spending time with a woman named Rowena Fellows. I saw them at the club several weeks ago. When I asked Jasper about her, he became evasive. What do you know about Mrs. Fellows? Only that she's connected to the art world somehow. Gallery owner, or curator, I think. Jasper said she was helping him acquire something rare. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. His version of excitement. Acquire what? He wouldn't say. But whatever it was, it made him nervous. Jasper Thorne nervous. That alone should tell you it was significant. When you saw them at the club, how did they seem? Intimate, like old friends, or, Ashcroft hesitated. Lovers, I supplied.
Possibly. Jasper's been alone since his divorce. I wouldn't blame him for seeking companionship.
But, Wolfe prompted. But there was something transactional about their interaction. The way she listened intensely, like she was memorizing everything, and the way he looked at her, less like a suitor and more like a conspirator. Wolfe leaned back, the chair protesting. "Mr. Ashcroft, I need you to do 3 things. First, provide Archie with a complete list of your business's recent transactions, including any unusual purchases or sales. Second, give him access to Thorne's office at your establishment. Third, tell no one, including Inspector Kramer, about this conversation." "Why are you involved in this?" "Because someone involved me. Whether I remain involved depends on what I discover in the next 48 hours. After Ashcroft left with promises, a list of transactions and a key to Thorne's office, I looked at Wolfe. "So we're definitely taking this case. We're investigating a challenge. If it becomes a case, I'll require a client and a fee." "Ashcroft would hire you." "Undoubtedly. But I prefer to understand the situation fully before accepting obligations." Translation: you want to solve it before anyone pays you, just to prove you can. His glare was answer enough. I grabbed my coat and Diana's leash. "Art galleries await. Try not to get too comfortable while I'm doing actual work." "Archie." "Yes. Be careful. Someone who would sever a man's hand to make a point is someone who regards violence as communication. Such people rarely limit themselves to one message." Diana and I headed into the fog. Section 5, Secrets in Soho. The gallery was called Meridian, and it occupied a renovated warehouse in Soho that probably cost more than most people earned in a decade. Diana attracted attention immediately. A sleek Doberman among the art crowd was either a statement or a threat depending on your perspective. I went for statement. Lily's cousin, Rebecca Chen, worked as an assistant curator. She emerged from the back office, looking effortlessly elegant in black, and regarding Diana with approval. "Archie Goodwin," she said. "Lily mentioned you might stop by. She also mentioned you stood her up last night. Professional obligation. I'll make it up to her." You'd better. That's a beautiful dog. She's working security today. I need information about someone in your world. Rebecca's expression sharpened. This is about a case. Potentially. Come to my office. Your colleague can come too. Diana followed us into a space that was more art than office. Minimalist furniture, perfect lighting, walls covered with small paintings that probably each cost more than my annual salary. Rebecca poured coffee without asking if I wanted any. Who are you looking for? She asked. Rowena Fellows, possibly connected to galleries or private collections. Late 30s, auburn hair, expensive taste. Rebecca's face went carefully neutral, which told me everything. You know her, I said. I know of her. She's complicated.
Complicated? How?
Rebecca sighed. Rowena Fellows operates in a space between legitimate art dealing and something more questionable. She brokers private sales, connects collectors with rare pieces, facilitates acquisitions that museums and galleries can't or won't handle. Because they're stolen? Because they're contested. Grey market stuff pieces with complicated provenance, items that walked out of Europe during the war, antiquities that might have been illegally excavated. Not technically stolen, but not exactly clean either. She's a fence. She's a facilitator. There's a difference. Not much of one. Enough of one to keep her out of jail, and in demand among collectors who have more money than scruples. I thought about what Ashcroft had said. Thorne working on something that could change the nature of the business. What if someone wanted to acquire something spectacularly valuable? Something that would require someone with Fellows' particular talents? Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. Are we talking about what I think we're talking about? You tell me what you think we're talking about. There's been a rumor, just a rumor, circulating among high-end dealers for the past 3 months. Someone claims to have acquired the Castellan Serpent. The what now? The Castellan Serpent. It's a legendary piece, supposedly created by Benvenuto Cellini in the 16th century. A collar necklace made of interlocking serpents in gold and emeralds, designed for a Medici duchess. It vanished during the French Revolution, turned up briefly in Vienna in the 1890s, then disappeared again. Most experts assume it was destroyed or broken up for the stones. But someone thinks they have it. Someone claims they have it. And if they do, it's worth somewhere between $15 and $30 million. Maybe more to the right buyer. I thought about the Ouroboros cufflink, the serpent eating its own tail. Would Jasper Thorne have been interested in something like that? Thorne? Absolutely. He was obsessed with legendary jewelry pieces. Having the Castellan Serpent would make him the most significant private collector in America, maybe the world, and Rowena Fellows would be the person to help him acquire it. If anyone could, she could. Diana shifted at my feet, a small movement that meant she'd sensed something. I trusted her instincts. Where can I find Fellows? I asked. Rebecca hesitated. I shouldn't tell you this. But you're going to anyway, because Lily would never forgive you if you didn't, and also because you're curious about what happens next. She smiled reluctantly. She has an office in an apartment building on East 71st Street, top floor penthouse. She's usually there on Saturday afternoons. That's when she meets with her most private clients. Thank you, Rebecca. You've been extraordinarily helpful. Archie, be careful with her. Rowena Fellows is smart, connected, and has friends in places most people don't even know exist. If she's involved in something that got a man killed, she won't hesitate to protect herself. Diana and I took a cab to East 71st Street. The building was exactly what I expected. Pre-war elegance, doorman in full uniform, lobby that smelled like money and old secrets. The doorman looked at Diana with considerably less enthusiasm than Rebecca had. I'm here to see Mrs. Fellows, I said. Is she expecting you? No. But she'll want to see me. Tell her it's about Jasper Thorne and the Castellan Serpent. The doorman made a phone call, spoke quietly, listened, then hung up looking surprised. Penthouse. She'll buzz you up. The elevator was the kind that still had an operator, and he regarded Diana with the professional neutrality of someone who'd seen everything. We rose in silence. The penthouse door opened before I could knock. Rowena Fellows stood there, and she was exactly as Peterson had described. Late 30s, auburn hair pulled back in a severe chignon, wearing what was probably called a lounging outfit, but looked ready for a magazine spread. Behind her, the apartment was all windows and art, and the kind of careful arrangement that spoke of serious money. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I know who you are, of course. I make it my business to know people who might become relevant, but I'm surprised you know about me. I make it my business to know people who are already relevant. May I come in?" "With the dog?" "Diana's very well behaved." "I'm sure she is." Fellows stepped aside. "Would you like coffee? I have excellent coffee." "I'd like information, but I'll accept coffee as well." The apartment was stunning. Museum-quality pieces on the walls, furniture that balanced modernism with comfort, and a view of Central Park that probably added $500,000 to the price. Fellows gestured me to a sofa while she poured coffee from a silver service. "You mentioned Jasper Thorne and the Castellan Serpent," she said, handing me a cup. "That's an interesting combination of subjects. Jasper Thorne is dead. Someone cut off his hand and stuffed it in a pumpkin, which was then delivered to my employer's doorstep. The hand was wearing an Ouroboros cufflink. The symbol of a serpent eating its own tail seemed relevant. Fellows' hand didn't shake as she sipped her coffee, but her knuckles were white against the cup. "Dead," she repeated softly. "You didn't know." "I knew he was missing. I didn't know he was dead." "You argued with him Wednesday night at the club." "You have been busy." "Yes, we argued. Jasper was about to do something phenomenally stupid, and I tried to talk him out of it." "The Castellan Serpent. You know more than I expected. I'm a professional. What was stupid about acquiring it?" Fellows set down her coffee and walked to the windows. Diana watched her carefully. "The serpent exists. I verified its authenticity 6 weeks ago. It's magnificent, Cellini at his finest, perfectly preserved, worth a fortune, but it came with complications. Such as the current owner being a man who doesn't technically exist. A collector who operates through intermediaries, who's never been photographed, whose real name might not be known to anyone. He's called, with impressive lack of imagination, the Collector. He has one of the greatest private hoards of stolen art and antiquities in the world. And he wanted to sell the serpent. Not sell, trade. He was willing to exchange it for something specific that Jasper had." "What?" "I don't know. Jasper wouldn't tell me. But whatever it was dangerous enough that I told him not to do it. But he was going to anyway. He was obsessed. The serpent would be his legacy, his masterpiece, the thing he'd be remembered for. He didn't care about the risks." "What risks specifically?" Fellows turned from the window. "Mr. Goodwin, the kind of people who deal in pieces like the Castellan Serpent don't operate by normal rules. They don't use contracts or courts. If a deal goes wrong, they don't sue. They solve their problems more permanently." "You think the collector killed Thorne?" "I think someone did. And if it wasn't the collector, it was someone else in that world. Once you enter that realm, the truly high-stakes black market, you're playing a game where the ante is your life." "Where would this exchange have taken place?" "I don't know. Jasper shut me out after our argument. He was angry that I wouldn't help him anymore. But you'd helped him before. You facilitated the contact with the collector." "I did, and I regret it immensely now." I studied her. She seemed genuine in her regret. But then people who operated in grey markets tended to be excellent actors. "One more question," I said. "Do you know anyone else who was interested in the serpent? Anyone who might have wanted to prevent Thorne from getting it?" Fellows laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Goodwin, half the major collectors in the world would kill for the Castellan Serpent. It's one of the most legendary pieces in existence. The question isn't who wanted it, it's who wanted it badly enough to murder for it." Diana tensed suddenly, a low growl building. Fellows looked at her, then at me. "Your dog senses something." "She usually does." "Then I suggest you leave, quickly." I didn't argue. Diana and I were in the elevator within 30 seconds, and as the doors closed, I heard Fellows' door slam and lock. The operator didn't speak during our descent, but I noticed his hand was shaking on the controls. Outside, the fog had thickened. Diana stayed close, alert to every shadow. We'd walked 2 blocks when I saw it, the same dark sedan from last night, parked on the corner, engine running, no plates visible through the fog. "Time to go, girl," I said, and we headed for the nearest subway entrance. Sometimes the best defense was disappearing into crowds where a car couldn't follow. We emerged 6 blocks from the brownstone and walked quickly, Diana checking every alley and doorway. When we finally reached West 35th Street, Caesar was waiting in the window, silhouetted against the lamplight. Inside, I gave Wolfe my full report. He listened without interruption, then sat back. "The Castellan Serpent," he said. "This grows more interesting. And more dangerous. Somebody's following us. To be expected, we've made ourselves visible in their world. They're assessing the threat we pose. And if they decide we're too much of a threat, then Archie, we'll see how well bulletproof windows and 5 Dobermans perform against serious opposition." He said it calmly, as if discussing the weather, but I noticed he pressed the security button again. Outside, night was falling on Halloween weekend in Manhattan, and somewhere in the city, a killer was watching. Sunday arrived cold and clear, the fog burned away by a determined sun. Wolfe spent his morning with the orchids while I tackled the mountain of information we'd accumulated: Ashcroft's business records, background on Thorne, notes on Rowena Fellows, and the increasingly interesting question of the collector. At 10:30 the doorbell rang. Minerva's bark was different this time, curious rather than warning. Through the panel, I saw Saul Panzer standing on the stoop, back early from wherever he'd been. "You said Monday," he said as I let him in. "Wolfe said Monday. I'm delighted you're early. I was in Philadelphia. Caught the early train when I got your message. This is about the hand in the pumpkin? You've been following the news." "I've been following anything connected to Wolfe. What do you need?" I filled him in while Fritz made coffee. Saul listened with his usual intensity. Saul Panzer missed nothing, forgot nothing, and connected dots that most people didn't even know existed. "The Castellan Serpent," he said when I finished. "I've heard of it. There was a whisper 6 months ago that it had surfaced in Zurich. Then the whisper stopped. Because someone bought it? Or because someone killed the person doing the whispering? The high-end antiquities market doesn't appreciate loose talk. Can you track the collector? Find out who he really is?" Saul smiled, his rare smile. "I can try. It'll take time and contacts, but yes." "What else?" "Rowena Fellows said Thorne was going to trade something for the Serpent. Something the collector wanted specifically. Find out what Thorne had that would be worth that much. On it. I'll need access to his apartment and his office." Ashcroft gave me a key to the office. The apartment might be trickier. Kramer's probably got it sealed. Probably isn't, definitely. I grinned. Saul Panzer could get into sealed crime scenes the way some people got into taxis. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11, took his seat, and regarded Saul with satisfaction. "Glad to see you, Saul. I'll need your particular talents for this matter. Happy to help. Though I'm curious, why did you take this case? No client, no fee, just a challenge from someone who may be a murderer." "Because," Wolfe said slowly, "someone presumed to test me by transforming murder into theater. Such presumption deserves correction."
"Ah, professional pride."
"Precisely." The phone rang. I answered it to find Lon Cohen's voice, urgent and excited. "Archie, turn on Channel 7. Now." I switched on the television, a concession to modernity. Wolfe barely tolerated. The news was showing footage of Central Park, specifically the area near Bethesda Fountain, yellow police tape, crowds of gawkers, and Inspector Kramer looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. The reporter's voice was breathless with that particular excitement journalists got when covering violence. "Second body discovered this morning by joggers. Like the first victim, Jasper Thorne, this victim shows signs of ritual mutilation. Police are not releasing details, but sources say another Halloween-themed clue was left at the scene. Detective sources confirm both cases are now linked and being investigated as serial murders." Wolfe's hand moved, and the television went silent. "Call Kramer," he said. "Tell him we have information relevant to his investigation. Tell him we'll share it in exchange for access to both crime scenes." "He won't go for that." "He will, because he knows we're ahead of him, and his pride is less important than stopping a killer." I made the call. Kramer cursed creatively for 90 seconds, then agreed to meet us at Central Park in an hour. "Us?" I said to Wolfe after hanging up. "You're coming?" A second body suggests escalation. The killer is no longer content with theatrical gestures. They're building to something, and I need to see their work firsthand to understand what. This was significant. Wolfe leaving the brownstone was rarer than honest politicians and usually meant the case had reached critical mass. Saul, Wolfe, and I took a taxi, cramped with Wolfe's bulk, but faster than walking. Mars came with us because Central Park on Halloween weekend required protection. The cab driver kept glancing in his rearview mirror at the Doberman, but Mars sat perfectly still, alert but calm. Central Park was chaos. Police barriers, news crews, crowds of people trying to see what was happening. Kramer met us at the barrier, Stebbins beside him. "This better be worth it," Kramer said. "It will be," Wolfe replied. "Show us the body." Kramer led us past the barriers. The forensics team was still working, photographers documenting everything. The body lay near the fountain, covered with a sheet. A uniformed officer pulled it back at Kramer's nod. The victim was male, maybe 45, dressed in expensive casual clothes. But what caught everyone's attention was his face, or rather, the lack of it. Someone had carved it off with surgical precision, leaving only bone and tissue. "Jesus," Saul breathed. Wolfe's face showed nothing, but I saw his hand tighten on his cane. The face was removed post-mortem. "Coroner says yes," Kramer replied. "Death was from a single gunshot to the back of the head. The mutilation came after. Just like with Thorne, killed first, then the hand was removed." "Have you identified him?" "Not yet. No wallet, no ID, no fingerprints on file. We're trying dental records, but that'll take time. And the Halloween clue." Kramer gestured to an evidence bag held by Stebbins. Inside was a mask, one of those expensive theatrical masks, this one depicting a Greek comedy face, all exaggerated smile and hollow eyes. Behind the mask's eyes was a small piece of paper. Through the plastic, I could see elegant handwriting. "Can I see that?" Wolfe asked. Kramer nodded. Stebbins carefully removed the paper and handed it to Wolfe with gloved hands. Wolfe read it aloud. "Second riddle, second clue, a serpent's laugh at those who knew the value of a smiling face is nothing without truth's embrace. 2 down, 3 more, and then the feast. Unless the genius stops the beast." "It's a countdown," I said. 5 victims total. We're at 2. 3 more before what?" Kramer demanded. "Before whatever this killer is building toward," Wolfe said. "The Halloween feast they mention, likely Halloween night itself. That gives us approximately 30 hours. To do what? To identify this victim, understand the connection between the murders, and stop the killer before they complete their plan." Wolfe looked at Kramer. "I assume you'll want to work together on this now." Kramer's jaw worked. "What do you know that I don't?" "Quite a bit, Inspector, but I'll share it all if you'll allow Saul access to Thorne's apartment and provide us with everything you have on both victims." "Deal. But Wolfe, if you're holding back anything that could prevent another murder—" "I'm not. Murder is contemptible and boring. This theatrical display is offensive to both my intelligence and my sensibilities. I intend to end it." Back at the brownstone, we assembled in the office. Wolfe behind his desk, Saul and I in the spare chairs, Mars settling near the door. Wolfe's face had the expression I'd learned to recognize, pieces connecting, patterns emerging. "The riddle mentions a serpent," he said. "That's the link, the Castellan Serpent. Both victims were connected to it somehow." "Thorne was trying to acquire it," I said. "But who's the second victim?" "Someone who knew its value. Someone whose face was taken, perhaps because their face represented false presentation. A dealer, a forger, an expert who authenticated false pieces." Saul pulled out his phone. "I have a contact at the Metropolitan Museum. Let me make a call." While he talked quietly in the corner, I looked at Wolfe. "The killer's giving us clues. They want us to solve this." "Not solve. Race. They're testing whether I can stop them before they complete their plan." "Why?" "Because," Wolfe said heavily, "whoever this is sees murder as a puzzle, and themselves as my intellectual equal. They're proving something to themselves, to me, perhaps to the world." Saul returned. "My contact says there's been chatter about a high-level authenticator who went silent 2 weeks ago. Man named Hugo Vance, specialized in Renaissance jewelry, known for his ability to spot fakes. He was supposedly working on a major authentication project, but then he vanished." "That's our victim," I said. "Someone killed the authenticator." "To hide something," Wolfe said. or to ensure something remained hidden. Saul, check Thorne's office and apartment. Look for any connection to Vance, any documentation about authentication, any evidence of the serpent itself. Archie, contact Rowena Fellows again. Ask her about Vance and whether he was involved in verifying the Castellan Serpent. And you? I'm going to think. We have 30 hours to prevent 3 more murders and identify a killer who sees Halloween as their deadline. That requires concentrated thought. He closed his eyes. The hunt was fully engaged now. Monday morning came too quickly. I'd spent Sunday evening running down leads. Fellows confirmed that Hugo Vance had authenticated the Castellan Serpent 6 weeks ago and declared it genuine, which had apparently signed his death warrant. Saul had found evidence in Thorne's office of extensive correspondence with an intermediary for the collector, using an untraceable email service. Fred Durkin and Ori Cather arrived at 11, as requested. Fred was reliable as gravity. Ori was sharp as broken glass, and both were used to Wolfe's particular brand of impossible demands. I briefed them quickly while Fritz served coffee and the Dobermans performed their usual inspection of visitors. Wolfe descended at 11:30, surveyed his assembled operatives, and nodded once. "Gentlemen, we're hunting a killer who operates in the shadows of the art world. They've murdered twice and planned 3 more deaths before Halloween night. Our task is to identify and stop them within the next 24 hours. "No pressure," Ori muttered. "Considerable pressure," Wolfe corrected, "which is why I'm assigning specific tasks. Fred, I need you to canvass costume shops in Manhattan. Someone who's staging theatrical murders will need costumes, masks, props. Find out who's been buying in bulk, particularly items related to Halloween and classical imagery." "Got it." "Ori, I need you to investigate the masquerade scene. Parties, balls, events happening this week. Someone planning a feast on Halloween night might be using an actual event as cover. There are about 50 Halloween parties happening tomorrow night in Manhattan alone. Then narrow it down. Focus on high society events, places where wealthy collectors might gather. Someone is targeting people in the art and jewelry world. They may strike at such an event." Ori left with a list of society columns to check. "Saul, continue tracking the collector. He's at the center of this web. Find him or find someone who knows him. Fred, before you check costume shops, go to Thorne's office. Ashcroft should be there. Ask him about any enemies Thorne might have had in the collecting community. Rivals, people he'd outbid for pieces, anyone who might hold a grudge." "You think this is professional jealousy?" I asked. "I think this is obsession. Someone is obsessed with the Castellan Serpent and willing to kill anyone who stands between them, and that level of obsession is usually rooted in desire, but it can also stem from rejection. Perhaps someone who tried to acquire the serpent and failed." The doorbell rang. Through the panel, I saw Inspector Kramer, looking like he'd had even less sleep than us. I let him in. "Another body," he said without preamble, "found an hour ago in a warehouse in Queens. Male, early 50s, both hands missing, and another damned riddle." Wolfe's expression darkened. 3 down already. They're accelerating. "Who is it?" "Marcus Riley, small-time art dealer, known for handling grey market pieces, had connections throughout the underground collecting world. And before you ask, yes, we found evidence in his office of communications with someone about the Castellan Serpent. Everyone connected to that necklace is dying," I said. "Which is why I'm here," Kramer said, pulling out his notebook. "I need the full list of everyone involved with it, because if this killer's working their way through everyone who knows about the serpent, we need to get to them first." Wolfe thought for a moment. "Rowena Fellows, the intermediary who connected Thorne with the collector, and the collector himself, though he remains unknown. Fellows is under protection as of an hour ago. My men are watching her apartment." "Good. But Kramer, consider this. The killer isn't simply eliminating people at random. Thorne lost a hand, the hand that wore the serpent cufflink. Vance lost his face, the face that authenticated the serpent. Riley lost both hands, perhaps because he handled it, facilitated its sale. There's symbolism here." "So what?" Kramer demanded. "The killer's making some kind of sick statement about how each victim was connected to the necklace." "Exactly that, which suggests the next victims will be chosen for equally specific reasons. Who's left to target?" "That," Wolfe said quietly, "is what we need to determine, and quickly." After Kramer left with promises to share information and threats about withholding evidence, Wolfe sat in heavy silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Archie, call Rowena Fellows. Ask her exactly who else knew about the serpent. Everyone, dealers, experts, anyone who had any knowledge of it. I made the call. Fellows answered on the first ring, her voice tight with controlled fear. Mr. Goodwin, I assume you've heard about Marcus Riley. Just did. How well did you know him? Well enough. He was going to help transport the serpent once the deal was complete. Now he's dead, and I'm terrified I'm next. Kramer's got people protecting you. That's comforting, except we both know that if this killer is determined enough, no protection is perfect. Which is why we need to stop them. Who else knew about the serpent? She was quiet for a moment. There's someone I haven't mentioned. A woman named Portia Ashworth. She's an appraiser, does valuations for insurance companies and estates. Thorne hired her to evaluate the serpent before he committed to the trade. She saw it, photographed it, documented it. Where is she now? I don't know. She lives somewhere in Brooklyn. But Mr. Goodwin, there's something else. What? The collector. I know who he is. My hand tightened on the phone. You've known all along. I've known for 3 days, since Thorne went missing. I didn't say anything because I was afraid. Afraid of the collector, afraid of the police, afraid of becoming a target. But now people are dying, and I can't stay silent. Who is he? His real name is Desmond Fairholt. He's a recluse, lives in a mansion in Westchester that's practically a fortress. Old money, collected art and antiquities for 40 years, never makes public appearances. He uses intermediaries for everything. The Castellan Serpent was supposed to be the crown jewel of his collection. Why would he want to trade it away? Because Thorne had something he wanted more. I don't know what. Thorne never told me. But it was important enough that Fairholt was willing to give up the serpent. And now, someone's killing everyone connected to that trade. Yes, which means either Fairholt is the killer, or someone's targeting his network to get to him. I thanked her, hung up, and relayed everything to Wolfe. He listened with his eyes closed, his thinking posture. Desmond Fairholt, he said. Saul might know of him, and we need to find Portia Ashworth immediately. If the killer is working through everyone who's seen the serpent, she's next. I'll track her down. Take Diana with you. And Archie, be armed. I looked at him. Wolfe rarely explicitly told me to carry a weapon. He preferred to pretend violence was beneath our notice. You think it's that dangerous? I think we're approaching the end of this killer's plan, whatever it is. They've killed 3 people in less than 4 days. They're building to something on Halloween night, tomorrow night. Anyone standing in their way is at risk, including us. Especially us. We've been challenged, and we've accepted. That makes us participants in their game, whether we like it or not. Diana and I headed to Brooklyn with an address Saul had tracked down through his mysterious network of contacts. Portia Ashworth lived in Park Slope, in a brownstone that was smaller and considerably less fortified than Wolfe's. I rang the bell. No answer. I rang again. Still nothing. Diana growled softly. You sense something, girl? She was staring at the door with intense focus. I tried the handle, unlocked. That wasn't good. Miss Ashworth? I called, pushing the door open. I'm a private investigator. I need to talk to you about the Castellan Serpent. Silence. Diana entered first, her whole body alert. I followed, hand moving automatically to the .38 in my shoulder holster. The apartment was neat, tastefully decorated, and completely empty of people. But on the coffee table, arranged with care, was a pumpkin, smaller than the one delivered to our door, but carved with the same skilled hand, and inside it, visible through the carved mouth, was something wrapped in silk. I approached carefully. Diana stayed close, muscles tense. Using a pen from my pocket, I unwrapped the silk. Inside were 2 things: a pair of eyeglasses with thick lenses, the kind an appraiser would wear, and another note. 4th riddle, 4th prize. She saw too much with critical eyes. The serpent's curse strikes those who stare too closely at what should stay rare. 1 more remains before the night. Find her before I take my flight. Damn it, I said. Diana barked sharply. Warning. I turned to see a figure in the doorway. Tall, dressed in black, wearing a grotesque mask that covered their entire face. Before I could react, they threw something. A canister hit the floor and erupted with smoke. Diana lunged, but the figure was already gone, footsteps pounding down the stairs. I ran after them, but the smoke was thick and my eyes were streaming. By the time I reached the street, they'd vanished into the Brooklyn afternoon crowds. I called Wolfe immediately. Portia Ashworth is missing. The killer was just here. Are you injured? No, but they left another riddle. We're at victim 4. One more to go. Return to the brownstone. Quickly. And Archie, if they were there when you arrived, they may have been waiting for you specifically. They know we're investigating. That makes us targets as well as opponents. Deanna and I took a cab back to Manhattan, both of us watching every car, every person, every shadow. When we finally reached the brownstone, Caesar met us at the door with what looked like relief, if Dobermans could show such emotions. Inside, Saul had returned with news. I found Desmond Fairholt, or rather, I found his mansion in Westchester. Apparently, he's throwing a party tomorrow night. On Halloween, I said. On Halloween. It's an annual event. Masquerade ball. Invitation only. Manhattan's elite art collectors and dealers. 200 guests, all in costume. Perfect place for a killer to hide. Wolfe opened his eyes. Or perfect place for a killer to complete their plan. 5 victims, culminating in a feast. A masquerade ball certainly qualifies. You think the 5th victim is at that party? I think the killer will be at that party. And I think we need to be there as well. Fairholt won't let us in. Then we'll need an invitation. Saul, can you acquire one? Saul smiled. I can acquire 2. But Wolfe, there's something else. I've been digging into Fairholt's history. He's not just a collector. 20 years ago, he was suspected of being involved in several art thefts across Europe. Nothing was ever proven, but the timing was suspicious. Pieces would vanish from museums, then turn up in private collections years later. You think he's a thief himself? I think he's someone who's willing to break laws to acquire what he wants. Which makes me wonder, what if the Castellan Serpent was his theft? What if he stole it, and now someone's killing everyone who knows he has it? Wolfe considered this. Or what if someone stole it from him, and he's the killer, eliminating everyone who can connect him to it? Either way, I said, tomorrow night's party is going to be the finale. 5th victim, final riddle, and probably our last chance to stop this. Then Wolfe said, heaving himself out of his chair, we'd better prepare accordingly. Archie, firearms for both of us. Saul, I'll need you and Fred as backup at the party. And someone should warn Inspector Kramer that tomorrow night in Westchester, a killer plans to complete their work. He looked at us all gravely. Gentlemen, we've been challenged to stop a murderer who sees death as theater. Tomorrow night, on Halloween, that theater reaches its final act. We will be in attendance, and we will end this. It was the most determined I'd ever seen him. Outside, the afternoon was fading into a chilly October evening. Tomorrow was Halloween. Tomorrow was the deadline. Tomorrow we'd face a killer at a masquerade ball, surrounded by masks and secrets, and the possibility that any one of 200 guests could be the murderer we sought. I'd been to plenty of dangerous places in my time working for Nero Wolfe, but somehow, this felt different. This felt personal. Halloween morning arrived with unseasonable cold, the kind that made even Manhattan's concrete seem to shiver. I woke at 6 to find Caesar sitting outside my bedroom door, not his usual post. He'd appointed himself additional security, apparently. Downstairs, Fritz was already in the kitchen, preparing something that smelled like cinnamon and apples, and Wolfe was at his desk earlier than normal, surrounded by papers. The other Dobermans were scattered through the brownstone in what looked like deliberate defensive positions. You're up early, I said. I'm attempting to identify the 5th victim before they become a corpse. He gestured at the papers. These are profiles of everyone connected to the Castellan Serpent: dealers, appraisers, collectors who've expressed interest, experts who've studied it. The killer has been eliminating people systematically. There must be a pattern beyond simple connection to the necklace. I poured coffee and studied the list. Jasper Thorne wanted to acquire it. Hugo Vance authenticated it. Marcus Riley planned to transport it. Portia Ashworth appraised its value. All dead or missing, all connected to the serpent's physical existence and movement. What if the 5th victim isn't another middleman? I said. What if it's someone who knows where the serpent is now? Desmond Fairholt himself, or whoever he was supposed to trade it to. You said Thorne had something Fairholt wanted. What if that's the key? What if the killer is someone who wants both the serpent and whatever Thorne had? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That would explain the targeting. Eliminate everyone who knows about the serpent's location, then take it without witnesses. The phone rang. It was Kramer, and he didn't sound happy. Wolfe, we've got a situation. Desmond Fairholt called me an hour ago. Someone broke into his mansion last night, disabled his security system, and left a pumpkin in his study. Inside was a mask and a note saying, "Save a dance for me at the feast." Fairholt's convinced he's the next target. He may be correct. Is he cancelling tonight's party? Are you kidding? He's doubling security, hiring private guards, and inviting more people. Says he won't be terrorized by some maniac. The party's still on, and he's daring the killer to try something. Courageous or foolish, possibly both. I'm sending plainclothes officers. They'll be scattered through the guests. If anything happens, we'll be ready. After Kramer hung up, Wolfe sat back. The killer has declared their intention to strike tonight at the party. Fairholt knows it. We know it. This has ceased being a hunt and become a confrontation. Which means the killer's confident. They think they can get away with murder in front of 200 witnesses and police officers. Or they have a plan that makes detection irrelevant. Either way, we'll be there. Saul has our invitations. We'll arrive at 8 when the party's in full swing. Bring the Tarmtoundi 8 and inform Mars and Apollo they're joining us. The other dogs will remain here with Fritz to protect the brownstone. You're bringing Dobermans to a masquerade ball. I'm bringing protection to a location where someone plans to commit murder. The dogs will be useful. At 7:30 we assembled. Wolfe in an enormous black cape that made him look like a mountain with fabric attached, me in a dark suit with a domino mask, Saul in his usual unnoticeable outfit, and Fred looking uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo. Mars and Apollo wore their most intimidating expressions and special collars that identified them as service animals, Saul's clever idea to bypass any objections about dogs at the party. The drive to Westchester took 40 minutes through Halloween dark roads. Kids in costumes darted between houses, jack-o'-lanterns glowed on porches, and the whole world seemed to have embraced the holiday. Fairholt's mansion appeared like something from a Gothic novel, all stone and spires and dramatically lit windows. Cars lined the driveway, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, vintage Packards. Manhattan's elite collectors had arrived in force. At the entrance, security checked invitations while trying not to stare at the Dobermans. Inside, the party was already chaotic. 200 people in elaborate costumes, masks ranging from simple dominoes to full-face theatrical pieces, music provided by a live orchestra, and enough champagne flowing to float a battleship. "This is a nightmare for security," I said to Saul. "Everyone's masked. Anyone could be the killer." Which is exactly why they chose this moment. Perfect camouflage. Wolfe stood near the entrance, surveying the crowd like a general planning a campaign. "Spread out. Fred, watch the exits. Saul, mingle and listen. Someone knows something. Archie, find Fairholt. I want to speak with him. And everyone, watch for anything unusual. A gesture, a conversation, anyone showing excessive interest in specific guests." I worked my way through the crowd with Mars at my side. The Doberman was drawing attention, but the kind that kept people at a respectful distance. Near the main staircase, I spotted a man in an expensive suit with a gold half-mask, Desmond Fairholt, holding court among admirers. He was smaller than I expected, maybe 5'7", with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd spent 60 years getting exactly what he wanted. When he saw me approaching with Mars, his expression flickered, interest mixed with apprehension. "Mr. Fairholt, Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe." "Ah, yes. Inspector Kramer mentioned you might attend. That's quite a dog. Mars is here for protection, yours and mine. You think the killer will actually try something tonight? With all these people? I think that's exactly when they'll try something. Maximum chaos, maximum confusion. Where's the Castellan Serpent now?" Fairholt's eyes widened slightly. "How do you know about that?" "Because 4 people are dead, and one's missing because of it. Everyone connected to that necklace is a target. So where is it?" He glanced around, then gestured to a quieter corner. "In my vault, 3 floors down, behind 6 inches of steel, and a security system that makes Fort Knox look casual. It's safe. Is it here, in this building? Yes. I brought it here 20 years ago. It's never left the estate. So when Thorne was going to trade for it, you were going to have him come here? Exactly. The Serpent never travels. Too valuable, too risky. What did Thorne have that you wanted? Fairholt hesitated. A Caravaggio, small piece, almost unknown, but authenticated. Judith and Holofernes, Study in Shadow. It vanished from a private collection in Italy during the war. Thorne acquired it through channels I'd rather not discuss. I've wanted that painting for 30 years, but the trade never happened. No. Thorne went missing before we could finalize arrangements. Mars suddenly tensed, a low growl building. I followed his gaze to a figure on the staircase, tall, masked with a Venetian long-nosed design that completely obscured their face, dressed in elegant black that could have been evening wear or executioner's outfit. They were watching us. "Excuse me," I said to Fairholt, and moved toward the stairs. But the figure melted into the crowd, disappearing among the other masked guests. Mars tracked them for a moment, then lost the scent. I found Wolfe in what Fairholt called the small gallery, a room lined with paintings worth more than most people saw in lifetimes. He was studying a Rembrandt with apparent fascination, but I knew he was actually watching the room's reflections in the bulletproof glass that protected the artwork. "Someone's here," I told him quietly, "watching us." Watching Fairholt. Mars sensed them. The killer likes to observe. They want to see the fear, the anticipation. It's part of their theater. What do? We wait. They'll make their move, and when they do, we'll be ready. At 9:30, Fairholt announced dinner, a buffet in the main ballroom, long tables of food that looked more like art than sustenance. The crowd moved en masse, creating exactly the kind of chaos someone could exploit. I stuck close to Fairholt, Mars never more than 3 feet away. That's when the lights went out. Complete darkness, 200 people gasping in unison, and in the darkness, a woman's scream. Emergency lights flickered on, dim, red-tinged, casting shadows that turned every masked figure into something sinister. In the center of the ballroom, a figure in the Venetian long-nose mask stood on a table, holding something that glinted in the emergency lights. The Castellan Serpent. It was magnificent even in the dim light, interlocking gold serpents, emeralds catching what little illumination existed, the kind of jewelry that made you understand why people killed for it. "Ladies and gentlemen," the masked figure said, their voice amplified somehow, echoing through the ballroom. "Thank you for attending this year's feast. I've enjoyed the hospitality, the lovely masks, the excellent food, but I'm afraid I must depart with something that doesn't belong to our host." Fairholt lurched forward. "That's mine. Security." But security couldn't move. I saw why. Throughout the ballroom, other masked figures had appeared, all dressed identically in black, all holding what looked like weapons. At least 10 of them positioned strategically, controlling the room. 5 people died for this necklace, the figure continued. 5 people who made the mistake of standing between me and what I wanted. I gave Mr. Wolfe every chance to solve my riddles, to figure out my plan, to stop me. But here we are, and here I am, and here is the serpent. They held it up, the gold catching light. The game is over, the challenge is complete, and the serpent comes home with me. That's when Wolfe's voice cut through the chaos, calm and precise. No, it doesn't. All eyes turned to him. He stood near the door, looking massive in his cape, and impossibly, there were police officers flanking him, Kramer's plainclothes team, all with weapons drawn. "You've made several errors," Wolfe continued. "First, you assumed I would follow your theatrical breadcrumbs instead of investigating the truth. Second, you assumed Mr. Fairholt's security was his only protection. Third, and most significantly, you assumed I cared more about solving your puzzle than stopping you. I don't solve murders for sport, madam. I solve them to end them." "Madam," the figure said, "your voice is altered, but your posture, your movements, the way you hold the necklace, all feminine. And there's only one woman with sufficient motive to plan 5 murders and stage this elaborate theft." Wolfe gestured to Kramer, who moved forward with officers. "Rowena Fellows." The figure went completely still. "Remove the mask," Wolfe ordered. After a moment's hesitation, The figure reached up and pulled off the Venetian long-nose mask. Rowena Fellows stood there, her auburn hair perfect, her expression utterly composed. "How did you know?" she asked. "Because you were the only person who knew everything," Wolfe said. "You knew about the serpent, about Thorne's plans, about every player in this drama. You connected them all, and when I examined the murders, I saw a pattern. You were eliminating anyone who could identify you as the thief. Thorne knew you facilitated the theft. Vance authenticated it, but could have authenticated a replacement. Riley would have transported it. Ashworth appraised it. All witnesses to your involvement. But you made one crucial error." "What error?" "You sent me that first letter. The theatrical challenge. If you'd simply stolen the serpent and vanished, no one would have connected the murders to you. But you couldn't resist proving you were clever enough to commit the perfect crime while taunting a detective. That hubris exposed you." Fellows smiled, and it was chilling. "Perhaps, but I still have the serpent, and I still have 10 associates with weapons surrounding you and your policemen. How do you propose to stop me?" "By doing what you didn't expect. Saul?" From the balcony above, Saul's voice called out, "All exits are covered. Rooftop, service entrance, parking garage. Your escape routes are closed." "And," Wolfe added, "the Castellan Serpent you're holding is a reproduction. An excellent one, created by the Metropolitan Museum's conservation team over the past 24 hours. The real serpent is in police custody." Fellows looked down at the necklace in her hands, then back at Wolfe. "You switched it." "This afternoon, Mr. Fairholt was persuaded to cooperate once I explained you'd likely attempt exactly this scenario. The real question is whether you're willing to have your associates murder 200 witnesses for a fake." For a long moment, Fellows stood perfectly still. Then slowly, she set the reproduction on the table. "I suppose," she said, "the game is over after all." Kramer's officers moved in, surrounding her and her associates. Weapons were confiscated, masks removed, and one by one, the accomplices were revealed. Small-time criminals and desperate people Fellows had recruited with promises of money. As they led her away in handcuffs, she paused near Wolfe. "You really are as good as they say." "I'm adequate," Wolfe replied, "but you, madam, were not. You were theatrical when you should have been simple, complex when you should have been direct. Murder is never art, no matter how you dress it." After they'd gone, Fellows, her associates, the police, and eventually the stunned party guests, Fairholt approached Wolfe in the now quiet ballroom. "Mr. Wolfe, I owe you a debt. Name your fee." "My fee is satisfaction at stopping a murderer. However, there is one thing you could do. Anything." "The Caravaggio that Thorne had. Judith and Holofernes, Study in Shadow. It belonged to a family in Italy before the war. I'd like you to return it to them." Fairholt's face flickered with disappointment, then resignation. "You're right. It should go home. I'll arrange it." Wolfe nodded once, turned and headed for the exit with remarkable speed for a man his size. In the car heading back to Manhattan, I looked at him. "How did you know Fellows was the killer?" "Process of elimination. She was present at every connection, knew every detail, and had access to everyone involved. But the final proof was the riddles themselves. They were written by someone who wanted to demonstrate intellectual superiority, not masculine ego, which would have been cruder, feminine pride, which can be far more sophisticated and far more dangerous, and the switch with the reproduction. I called the Metropolitan yesterday. They were quite accommodating once I explained a murderer would be using their party as a stage." Mars and Apollo dozed in the back seat, finally relaxing. Outside, Manhattan sparkled with Halloween celebrations, children trick-or-treating, adults at parties, the whole city embracing one night of masks and fantasy. We'd stopped a killer who'd turned Halloween into a horror show. 5 people had died before we'd pieced it together, but we'd prevented the 6th death, possibly Fairholt's, possibly someone else's at the party. At the brownstone, Fritz had waited up, beer on ice for Wolfe, sandwiches for the rest of us. The other Dobermans greeted Mars and Apollo like returning heroes. Caesar inspected us all for injuries, found none, and finally settled by the office door. Wolfe sat in his chair, drank beer, and didn't open a book. "You did good work, Archie." "We all did." "True, but you're the one who followed the leads, found the connections, kept Mars from eating Fairholt's security team. Credit where credit is due." So what now? Kramer will want a statement. The press will want interviews. Fairholt might actually try to pay us. Now, Wolfe said heavily, I'm going to finish my beer, go to bed. And tomorrow, I'm going to spend the day with my orchids and pretend this entire Halloween never happened. I detest theatrical murders. I detest Halloween. And I particularly detest being challenged by people who think murder is a game. But you won, I pointed out. I prevented more deaths. That's not winning. That's merely stopping the losing. He finished his beer and heaved himself upright. Good night, Archie. And please, if anyone else decides to leave a pumpkin on our doorstep, shoot it first and ask questions later. I grinned. Will do. As he lumbered toward the stairs, I sat at my desk, looked at the Dobermans scattered through the office, and thought about the case. 5 dead, 1 killer caught, 1 legendary necklace returned to police custody, and 1 very angry detective who'd been manipulated into playing someone else's game. Not a bad Halloween's work. Outside, the city was finally quieting. The last trick-or-treaters were heading home, parties winding down, and October was preparing to transition into November. In the brownstone on West 35th Street, bulletproof windows reflected the streetlights. 5 Dobermans kept their vigil, and Nero Wolfe, genius, curmudgeon, and possibly the most stubborn man in Manhattan, slept soundly, dreaming of orchids and beer and problems that could be solved without dead bodies in pumpkins. November 1st arrived with brutal sunshine and a temperature drop that made yesterday's autumn feel like a memory. I came downstairs at 8 to find Fritz already dealing with reporters camped outside. The story had broken overnight, and apparently Nero Wolfe solving a series of Halloween murders was big news. Mr. Archie, Fritz said, looking harassed, they have been ringing the bell since 6. I have told them Mr. Wolfe does not give interviews, but they insist. Keep telling them. Wolfe would rather eat his orchids than talk to reporters. Caesar sat by the door, watching the crowd outside with what looked like disdain. The other Dobermans had taken up defensive positions throughout the first floor. Apparently their sense of threat hadn't entirely dissipated. The phone rang. I answered it to find Lon Cohen's cheerful voice. Archie, tell me everything. The Gazette wants an exclusive. Wolfe doesn't do exclusives. How about a comment? Something I can quote? Mr. Wolfe is pleased the matter has been resolved and hopes Halloween will return to its proper status as a holiday for children and people with questionable taste in costumes. That's perfect. Very Wolfe. But seriously, give me something. This is the biggest story of the month. Serial killer, legendary jewel, Halloween masquerade ball. It's got everything. Fine. Off the record. For your background, Rowena Fellows spent 2 years planning this theft. She originally intended to be hired as the broker for Thorne's acquisition of the Serpent, then betray him and steal it herself. But when Thorne went directly to Fairholt without including her in the final negotiations, she decided to eliminate everyone who could identify her involvement. The murders were meant to look like a psychopath's Halloween spree, but they were actually cold-blooded eliminations of witnesses. And the challenge to Wolfe? Pure arrogance. She thought she could prove she was as smart as him by leaving clues and taunting him into solving a puzzle while she committed the actual crime. Did it work? Obviously not. Wolfe doesn't play games, he stops them. She mistook his preference for privacy, for inability to act when necessary. Great stuff. Can I use any of it? You can use the general outline. Just keep Wolfe's involvement low-key. He hates publicity. Archie. He solved a series of theatrical murders on Halloween night at a masquerade ball. There's no keeping that low-key. He had a point. Inspector Kramer arrived at 9:30, just as Wolfe was descending from the plant rooms. Kramer looked better than yesterday. He'd slept at least a little, but still worn down by the case's complexity. Fellows has confessed, he said without preamble. Everything. The planning, the murders, the accomplices she hired. She's proud of it, actually. Thinks she almost succeeded. She did almost succeed, Wolfe said, settling into his chair. Her plan was sound. Her execution was meticulous. Her only error was involving me. She said, "You're the smartest person she's ever matched wits with." I'm not interested in her opinion of me. Is she providing information about her criminal network? People who helped her acquire and dispose of stolen artwork over the years? Singing like a canary. We've already arrested 3 dealers and 2 forgers based on her information. This is going to break open a major smuggling operation. Good. Then something productive comes from this tragedy. Wolfe, I need a statement from you for the district attorney. Your account of the investigation, how you identified Fellows, everything. Archie will provide it. He was present for all relevant events. It needs to come from you. Then it will come from me, but through Archie's typing. I've said repeatedly, I don't testify if it can be avoided. Kramer sighed. You're difficult. I'm consistent. There's a difference. After Kramer left with promises of a written statement by end of week, Wolfe sat in silence, staring at nothing. I recognized the mood, post-case letdown, the emptiness that came after intense concentration, had nothing left to focus on. You okay? I asked. 5 people died, Archie. 5 people who made the mistake of being tangentially connected to a valuable object. They weren't villains or heroes. They were ordinary people in the wrong place at the wrong time. Fellows killed them without hesitation, without remorse, purely to facilitate a theft. But you stopped her. After 5 deaths, that's not success, that's damage control. You can't blame yourself for murders you didn't commit. I can regret that the world contains people who regard murder as acceptable means to desired ends, and I can be deeply tired of investigating such people. He was silent for a moment, then added, I'm going to the plant rooms. Please inform anyone who calls that I'm not available until further notice. He left, and I heard his slow tread on the stairs, heavier than usual. The rest of the day passed quietly. Saul called to report that he'd collected our fee from Desmond Fairholt. Despite Wolfe's protestations, Fairholt had insisted on paying, and since we had expenses, I accepted. Fred checked in to say the press had finally left our doorstep. Ori confirmed that all of Fellows' accomplices had been arrested. At 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the panel, I saw a delivery person holding a large box. I opened the door cautiously. After last week, I was suspicious of all deliveries, but it was legitimate, a shipment from an orchid supplier in Brazil. I carried it up to the plant rooms. Wolfe was in the warm room, examining a cattleya that was preparing to bloom. Theodore Horstman, his orchid nurse, was nearby with a watering can. Delivery, I said. Wolfe glanced at the box, and something shifted in his expression, interest replacing melancholy. Ah, the Loelia superbiens. Excellent timing. I helped him unpack it carefully. The orchid was magnificent. Even I could see that, with flowers that looked like small pieces of art. Beautiful, Theodore said. Indeed. Wolfe examined it with gentle hands, checking for damage, assessing its health. This specimen is particularly fine. It will do well in the cool room, I think. I left them to their work. Orchid care was between Wolfe and Theodore, a sacred ritual I didn't presume to intrude on beyond necessary assistance. Back in the office, I finished the statement for Kramer, filed the week's paperwork, and answered the phone twice more, once from Lily, finally accepting my apology about missing her party, and once from a potential client, referred to another detective because Wolfe didn't need cases right now. At 6, Fritz announced dinner. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms looking closer to himself. The orchids had worked their usual magic. We ate in the dining room, roasted duck, fingerling potatoes, perfectly crisp green beans, and a wine that cost more than most people's weekly salary. Archie, Wolfe said halfway through dinner, I've been thinking about something Fairholt said. What's that? That the Castellan Serpent had been in his vault for 20 years, never leaving the estate. If that's true, how did Fellows plan to authenticate it for potential buyers after stealing it? She couldn't. Once she had it, she'd have to sell it to someone who didn't care about authentication, someone who wanted it for private ownership. Exactly, which means her entire plan hinged on finding a buyer willing to accept the serpent without proof. That's a very small market. Maybe she already had a buyer lined up. Possibly, or possibly her plan was more elaborate than we realized. Perhaps she intended to... He stopped. Never mind. The case is closed. Fellows is in custody. What she intended no longer matters. But I could see him still thinking about it, the gears turning. After dinner, we returned to the office. Wolfe read. I worked on correspondence, and the Dobermans settled into their evening positions. Fritz brought beer at 9, as always. The brownstone returned to its normal rhythms. At 10, Lily called. We talked for 20 minutes about her party, which had been excellent, my case, which she'd read about in the evening papers, and whether I was free Saturday, which I tentatively was, pending Wolfe's mood. After hanging up, I looked at Wolfe. He was still reading, but I could tell he was listening. "You like her?" he said without looking up from his book. "I do." "Good. You should have someone who makes you smile. The work we do is too dark to face alone. You face it alone. I have my orchids, and beer, and Fritz's cooking, and occasionally your company, which is almost tolerable." I grinned. Almost tolerable, high praise. Don't let it go to your head. At 11, I said good night and headed upstairs. In my room, I looked out at West 35th Street. November had arrived. Halloween was over, and somewhere in the city, Rowena Fellows sat in a cell, probably still convinced she'd almost pulled off the perfect crime. But she hadn't understood Nero Wolfe. She'd seen a recluse, a man who hid behind bulletproof glass and orchids and beer. What she hadn't seen was a mind that never stopped working, a man who regarded murder as the ultimate offense against rationality, and someone who, when properly motivated, could move with surprising speed and devastating efficiency. She'd challenged him with a theatrical murder spree, thinking she could prove herself his equal. Instead, she'd proven why you don't challenge a genius who's had decades to perfect his methods. The brownstone settled into sleep. Downstairs, Caesar would be on first watch, followed by Mars at midnight, then Apollo at 3. Fritz would secure the kitchen around midnight. The bulletproof windows would reflect nothing but streetlights. The security system would monitor every entrance. And Nero Wolfe would sleep soundly, dreaming of orchids and problems that could be solved with thinking rather than violence. 2 weeks later, life had returned to what passed for normal at the brownstone. The reporters had moved on to other stories. Kramer had gotten his statement and stopped calling. Desmond Fairholt had indeed returned the Caravaggio to its rightful owners in Italy and sent Wolfe a case of exceptional beer as thanks. Rowena Fellows was being held without bail, awaiting trial. The district attorney was confident of conviction. She'd confessed to everything, and the evidence was overwhelming. Her trial would likely be a media circus, which Wolfe was already dreading. Portia Ashworth had been found alive in a warehouse in Queens. Fellows had kept her prisoner, planning to use her as the 5th victim during the masquerade. She'd been traumatized but unharmed, and was now in therapy, trying to recover from her ordeal. The Castellan Serpent had been turned over to the Italian government, which claimed it was stolen from Florence during the war. Fairholt was negotiating to buy it legitimately once the provenance issues were resolved, which might take years. And I was in the office on a Wednesday afternoon, listening to Wolfe interview a potential client about a missing racehorse, which was refreshingly straightforward after Halloween's theatrical nightmare. The client left at 4. Wolfe had accepted the case, mostly because it involved no corpses, and we settled into our usual routine. Wolfe read. I handled correspondence. Fritz prepared something magnificent for dinner, and the Dobermans maintained their vigil. At 4:30, the doorbell rang. Through the panel, I saw a young woman, maybe 25, well-dressed, holding a small package. I opened the door. Diana approached cautiously, sniffed, and wagged her tail, which was Diana's version of "this person is fine." "Mr. Goodwin?" the woman said. "That's me. I'm Emily Ashworth, Portia's daughter. I wanted to thank you and Mr. Wolfe personally for saving my mother's life."
"Come in. Wolfe's in the office."
I brought her to Wolfe, who regarded her with his usual expression, equal parts curiosity and wariness of strangers. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "how is your mother?" "Better each day. She wanted to come herself, but she's not quite ready to leave the apartment yet. She asked me to deliver this." Emily set the package on Wolfe's desk. Inside was a small sculpture, a Doberman, cast in bronze, beautifully detailed, and beneath it, a note in elegant handwriting. "To Mr. Wolfe and Mr. Goodwin, with gratitude for saving my life and ending a nightmare. The sculpture reminded me of your magnificent dogs, who I'm told helped in my rescue. May they always protect your home as fiercely as you protected me. With eternal thanks, Portia Ashworth." Wolfe examined the sculpture with surprising gentleness. "This is quite fine. Bronze casting, early 20th century, possibly Austrian. Your mother has excellent taste. She's an appraiser. She knows quality. Please convey our thanks, and tell her she owes us nothing. Stopping a murderer was payment enough." She thought you might say that? She also asked me to tell you something else. What? What? That the world needs more people who stand against evil, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's dangerous. That's what you did, and she'll never forget it. After Emily left, Wolfe sat staring at the bronze Doberman for a long moment. Then he placed it carefully on his desk, where he could see it while working. That was nice, I said. It was unnecessary, but appreciated. You liked being called someone who stands against evil. I liked being called someone who does his job properly. There's a difference. Not much of one. He almost smiled. That evening, after dinner, Wolfe did something unusual. He invited Saul and Fred over for beer. Ori was on another case, but the 3 core members of Wolfe's irregular investigative force gathered in the office. We talked about the case, about Fellows' trial, about the recoveries of stolen art that her confession had enabled. We talked about other cases, old war stories, the usual shop talk of people who solve problems for a living. At 11, as Saul and Fred were leaving, Saul paused. Wolfe, I have to ask, how did you really know it was Fellows? Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Because of something Archie said during the investigation, he noted that Fellows was present at every connection point, knew every detail. But it was more than that. When I interviewed her about Thorne, she provided exactly the right amount of information. Not too much, not too little. That level of calibration suggested someone who knew precisely what to reveal and conceal. That's it? That's all? No. The final proof was her reaction when I mentioned the masquerade ball. She showed interest but not surprise. A truly innocent person would have questioned why I was asking. She already knew about the party because she was planning to use it. Clever, Fred said. Observant, Wolfe corrected. Cleverness is overrated. Observation and logic are sufficient. After they'd gone, I cleaned up the beer bottles and coffee cups, while the Dobermans performed their final evening rounds. Caesar checked the doors, Mars examined the windows, Apollo patrolled the hall, Minerva verified the locks, and Diana, ever intuitive, positioned herself at the foot of the stairs, watching both floors. You've trained them well, Wolfe said. They've trained me. I just follow their lead. An honest assessment. Too few people recognize when they're being taught by those supposedly beneath them. He heaved himself out of his chair and headed for the stairs. Good night, Archie. Tomorrow we have a racehorse to find, which should be refreshingly simple compared to murder and legendary jewels. Looking forward to simple. As am I. He paused at the door, looking back at the bronze Doberman sculpture on his desk. We did good work, didn't we? We did great work. Adequate work. Good is sufficient. Great invites hubris. Whatever you say, boss. He climbed the stairs, the old wood creaking under his weight. I sat at my desk for another hour, finishing paperwork and listening to the brownstone settle into sleep. Outside, November wind rattled the bulletproof windows. The jack-o'-lanterns had been replaced by chrysanthemums. Halloween was a memory, stored away with all the other cases we'd solved. 5 people had died. 1 killer had been stopped. 1 legendary necklace had been recovered. And Nero Wolfe had proven, once again, that theatrical challenges were no match for methodical investigation. In the corner, Caesar lifted his head and looked at me. I could swear he smiled. If Dobermans could smile. 3 days after Saul and Fred's visit, I received a letter, not at the brownstone, but forwarded from the Flamingo Club where Lily and I had been spending Friday evenings. The envelope was familiar, cream-colored stock, elegant handwriting, and my first instinct was to throw it away unopened. But curiosity is an occupational hazard in my line of work. I opened it in the office while Wolfe was with his orchids. Inside was a single page, written in Rowena Fellows' distinctive script. Dear Mr. Goodwin, by the time you read this, I will have been in custody for 2 weeks. The isolation provides ample time for reflection, and I find myself compelled to address something that has been troubling me. Mr. Wolfe was correct. I challenged him out of arrogance, believing I could prove myself his intellectual equal, but I realize now that I never understood what I was actually challenging. I saw a recluse who surrounded himself with orchids, beer and dogs. I saw someone who avoided the world, who protected himself behind bulletproof glass. I mistook his preference for a controlled environment as weakness or fear. What I failed to understand is that Mr. Wolfe doesn't hide from the world. He's simply selective about when and how he engages with it. When he does engage, he brings the full force of a brilliant mind that has spent years perfecting its methods. I planned for months. I executed my scheme with precision. I thought I'd accounted for every variable, but Mr. Wolfe needed only days to unravel what I'd constructed, because he understood something I didn't. Complexity is not the same as cleverness. I tried to be clever. He was simply thorough. This is not an apology. I don't apologize for my ambitions, only for my methods. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I challenged a master and learned that mastery is not about tricks or theater. It's about patient, relentless pursuit of truth. Tell Mr. Wolfe he was right about everything, especially about hubris. Respectfully, Rowena Fellows. P.S. There is one thing he wasn't right about, though I doubt it matters now. I did have a buyer for the Serpent, someone who would have taken it without authentication, someone with resources enough to hide it forever. But I'll take that name to prison with me. Some secrets are mine to keep. I read the letter twice, then carried it up to the plant rooms. Wolfe was examining a phalaenopsis that Theodore had just reported was preparing to bloom. I waited until he'd finished his inspection. "Letter from Fellows," I said, handing it to him. He read it without expression, then handed it back. "Interesting," he said. "That's all? Interesting? What would you have me say? She's correct in her assessment. She was clever but not thorough. That's a common error among intelligent criminals. They mistake intelligence for wisdom. She says she had a buyer, someone who could have hidden the serpent forever. Undoubtedly, there are always buyers for stolen art. Men with more money than morals, who see possession as the ultimate form of appreciation. Doesn't it bother you that she won't reveal who? Why should it? The serpent was recovered. Fellows is in custody. The buyer, whoever they are, lost their opportunity. That's sufficient." He turned back to the orchid, considering its placement. "Though I suspect she's lying about keeping the name secret. She'll trade it eventually, when she needs leverage for a reduced sentence. People like Fellows always do. You don't think she'll keep it to herself out of principle? Principle requires sacrifice. Fellows sacrifices only when there's nothing left to gain from holding on." Theodore approached with a watering can, and I took that as my cue to return to the office. But as I headed for the stairs, Wolfe called after me. "Archie." "Yes?" "Destroy the letter. I don't want it in our files. And don't mention it to Kramer. Let Fellows keep her small victory of having the last word. It costs us nothing and satisfies her ego. You're being generous. I'm being practical. A prisoner's ego is a manageable threat. A prisoner's desperation is not. Let her feel she won something, even if it's only the illusion of a secret." Back in the office, I fed the letter to the fireplace and watched it burn. The cream-colored paper blackened and curled, Fellows' elegant handwriting disappearing into ash. The phone rang. It was the client with the missing racehorse. They'd found it, safe and sound, and wanted to thank us profusely and pay our fee. I handled the details, made the appropriate notes, and felt the satisfaction of a case that ended with everyone alive and a horse returned to its stable. Simple, clean, exactly what we needed after Halloween's theatrical nightmare. At 6, Fritz announced dinner. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms looking pleased. The phalaenopsis was going to be spectacular, apparently. We ate in comfortable silence. Veal cutlets, asparagus in butter sauce, a salad that tasted like spring despite November's chill. After dinner, we returned to the office. Wolfe read. I worked on updating our case files, and the Dobermans settled into their evening positions. Outside, the first snow of the season was starting to fall. Light flakes that wouldn't stick but suggested winter was considering its arrival. At 9, Lily called. We talked about weekend plans. There was a new jazz club opening in the village that she wanted to try. I agreed. Wolfe pretended not to listen, and life continued its pleasant forward motion. At 10, I started to mention Fellows' letter, then stopped. Wolfe had said to destroy it and forget it. That was probably wise. But something about it nagged at me. "The buyer she mentioned," I said. "The one she claimed could have hidden the serpent forever. You think that's real?" Wolfe set down his book. "Probably. Doesn't it bother you not knowing? There are many things I don't know. The identity of one wealthy criminal among thousands is hardly worth losing sleep over. But, Archie, consider this. We solved the murders, we stopped the theft, we recovered the serpent, we saved Portia Ashworth's life. What more would knowing the buyer's identity accomplish? Justice? Justice was served when Fellows was arrested. What you're describing is completeness, knowing every detail, tying up every thread. That's satisfying intellectually, but not always necessary practically. So you're okay with loose ends? I'm realistic about which loose ends matter. The buyer exists. They'll try again with a different seller. If they succeed, someone else will investigate. If they fail, justice continues without our involvement. Either way, our role is complete. He picked up his book again. One of the hardest lessons in detective work is knowing when to stop. Some investigators chase leads forever, convinced the next clue will unlock perfect understanding. But perfect understanding is a myth. We settle for sufficient understanding and move forward. That's unusually philosophical for you. It's been an unusual month. 5 murders, a theatrical killer, and a Halloween masquerade ball tend to encourage philosophical reflection. I grinned. You hated every minute of it. I hated the murders. The investigation had its moments. Such as watching you chase leads with Mars, who proved considerably more reliable than some human assistants I could name, such as Saul's impeccable research, such as the satisfaction of proving that theatrical complexity is no match for methodical simplicity, and such as proving someone wrong who challenged you. That, Wolfe admitted, was gratifying, though I'd never admit it to anyone but you. Your secret's safe with me. At 11, I said goodnight and headed upstairs. In my room, I looked out at West 35th Street. Snow was falling heavier now, covering the sidewalks in white, transforming Manhattan into something cleaner and quieter than its usual self. The bronze Doberman sculpture sat on Wolfe's desk downstairs, catching lamplight. Portia Ashworth's thank you gift, a reminder that sometimes we did more than solve cases, we saved lives. 5 people had died before we'd stopped Rowena Fellows. That would always haunt us. But one person had lived because we'd figured it out in time. That had to count for something. Downstairs, I heard Wolfe's slow tread on the stairs, heading to bed. The Dobermans would settle into their night watch rotation. Fritz would secure the kitchen. The brownstone would sleep, protected and peaceful. And somewhere in a cell, Rowena Fellows would lie awake, probably still convinced she'd almost pulled off the perfect crime, still holding on to her secret buyer like a trophy. Let her, I thought. Let her have that small victory. We'd won the war. She could keep one battle. I fell asleep to the sound of snow against bulletproof windows and the distant padding of Doberman paws on hardwood floors. November had arrived. Halloween was over. The case was closed. And in the brownstone on West 35th Street, life returned to its comfortable rhythms. Orchids, beer, good food, loyal dogs, and the occasional murder to solve when someone was foolish enough to challenge a genius. Which, given human nature, would probably happen again soon enough. But not tonight. Tonight, we could rest.